It's starting the stream preparation. The hamsters are in the wheel. They're running. They're spinning. It's live on YouTube. We're going to broadcast. No more cursing. All right. And we're going to update the website live because that's what we do.
We need an intern.
Yes. And I actually am going to check the website to make sure we're live. Everybody's watching going, you are live. Live now, live now. Okay, folks, we are live. This is it. Virtual Design Master is back for another fun session. We're very, very proud because we've had a fun year. We've been doing a lot of chat, a lot of preparation, trying to figure out what the best way to approach Virtual Design Master as we've done in the past. And so with that, we're going to get started. We're going to reintroduce our folks here. My name is Eric Wright, otherwise known as @DiscoPosse. Of course, you can find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I blog at discoposse.com, so that's the easy way to track me down. I'm one of the co-creators of Virtual Design Master, which is the first and longest running IT reality competition. So that's a fun one. I'm actually lucky enough as well. Of course, we've got the rest of our creative team here. Angelo, a fellow co-creator. Angelo, if you want to introduce yourself, let us know where we can find you online.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone. Angelo Luciani on Twitter, blog at virtuize.com. Thanks for joining us today.
We would be nowhere without the very, very creative designs that made Virtual Design Master one of the most sensational reality shows that it is. There would be no zombies. There would be no craziness. And with that, Melissa, tell us where we can find you and tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Melissa. I am a VCDX like Renee here. Thanks to him and his mentorship throughout the Virtual Design Master process, it's something that kind of pushed me to go and get that certification. You can find me on Twitter at vmis33 and my blog vmis.net. And yeah, I'm responsible for the zombies, and people like to call me evil, but I never really understood that because I'm like such a nice person and all that stuff.
And Renee, as a longtime supporter of all things community, and of course Virtual Design Master, lucky enough to call you a friend as well as a peer. Introduce yourself. Tell us about where we can find you online.
Yep. Renee Van Den Bedham, VCDX133 on the Twitters and also on the web. Pretty easy to get to. Yeah, excited to be back for this year.
And it's not only about the people behind the scenes, but the people in front of the camera. And with that as well, that we are very happy to welcome back Katerina, who is a winner of Virtual Design Master. So one of our folks who's actually gone the distance, and we saw a lot of really cool growth and great ideas that came out. Katerina, where do we find you online? And then we're going to get started with this one.
Hi, so yeah, I'm Katerina, and you can find me on Twitter at _catgov_.
Excellent. This has been a fun one because we've looked year over year and we thought about how do we go to the next level. And every year it seems to go level, level, level. We've done some really neat things. We've had a great set of competitors. We've met friends who we've seen. A big shout out goes to Abdullah. He's Abdullah Squared, I think, on Twitter, who actually just achieved his VCDX. So Abdullah is an alum Design Master, great community contributor, somebody as well who we're very proud to watch his development in the industry. And we could literally go through this laundry list of folks who've been involved with our Virtual Design Master community, and they've gotten their VCDX or their NPX or their TOGAF, whatever it is. It's very exciting to see people take what they bring here to this program and take it fully into their own careers and their life. And with that, we're going to begin Masterclass number 2. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, we presented Masterclass number 1, and we talked about some of the neat ways of how you would approach design questions and situations and requirements. So folks can go. We're going to have links to that. You can still see it on virtualdesignmaster.io. It's on the YouTube as well. So, Angelo, hey, how do we find us on YouTube? You know the drill, right?
I've been practicing this all week. When you hit our channel, smash that like button, hit that little bell somewhere to get notifications, and you'll stay up to date on our latest videos, past videos, and upcoming videos. So.
Excellent. I put poor Angelo on the spot there. I can tell he's just like we're working on getting that. We're going to record him so that we've got it everywhere we go. Yeah. And Melissa's going to take us away. We're going to talk about something very, very cool today, especially to the VCDX in training and anybody who's looking at design.
Right. So today we're going to talk about something called the infrastructure design qualities. There are 5 of them. Everybody likes to use a different acronym. And I'm not actually going to explain it. I'm going to let Renee and Kat kind of give their explanation of what it is, why it's important, what acronym they like, and then we're going to go one by one through each design quality and chat about it. So who would like to go first?
We can let Kat go first.
Aw, so nice. Kat, you get to go first.
So nice. Okay, so the acronym I use is AMPRS, and it stands for Availability, Recoverability, Performance, Manageability, and Security. Qualities that we talk about in every design when we try to understand what the customer requirements are, and they help us to specify what we are actually building in an infrastructure. I believe we will go through each section separately, so that's just a quick overview of how I take it.
Yeah, so for me, I use the acronym RAMPS, just rolls off the tongue a lot more easy for me. So when I'm going through any kind of design discussion, that list is kind of what I'm ticking off in my mind to make sure that we're covering all of the different aspects of design from a requirements perspective. And then also in the background, what I typically write on the whiteboard just to drive the conversation across the enterprise is compute, network storage, data protection, information security, virtual machine design, cloud management platform, end user computing, IT service management. That's kind of the silos. And I end up with like this matrix of tick boxes as we've gone through and had that conversation with a bunch of diagrams and whatnot. So that's what I do for my initial meetings.
Great. So I think we're going to actually use Renee's acronym because I'm going to force myself into a mental do something different because I don't usually use it. So let's start with the first one. It's R for recoverability. And just kind of, when we go through each one, kind of talk about it, what it is, why it's important, most importantly, and common things you've seen aspiring architects either overlook in the area, maybe not think all the way through, things like that. Any kind of design tips for the area. And Renee, let's start with you this time. We'll alternate who goes first each time.
Yep. Okay. So recoverability, that is typically the area that is most commonly overlooked by young architects. To me, recoverability is about multi-site design. So when something goes badly wrong, how are you going to recover from that? Typically, there's three or four different levels of recoverability that you need to focus on. So fat fingering by administrators, deliberate modification of data that actually gets replicated across the site. That's probably the most difficult one to protect against. To disasters within the data center. So this is more of an availability discussion, but something goes wrong, power goes down, cooling goes down, top of rack switching, your core switch goes down, and then you've got a disaster at that particular site, whether that is a man-made or a natural disaster, the entire site has gone down, then recoverability, that's the true sense of the word. Okay, a single site's gone down. How are you going to protect against that?
Kat, how about you?
The same topic?
Yes, same topic.
Okay. Yeah, so as was mentioned, it is very important, especially if you're working with critical data that you need to make sure that you will always be able to recover. As Rani mentioned, it also depends what you are protecting against. So we are talking about whether it's on that data level or whether it's on the infrastructure level and data center level. What is important to measure, in my perspective, is not only the RPO and RTO, so the recovery point objective and recovery time objective, but also to me a very important figure is the maximum tolerable downtime for the customer. So the time it actually takes after so restoring the service and after the customer is again able to use the service fully. So those are the figures that we look at when we do the design.
And I have to admit to Renee's comment, when I was a baby architect, this was one of the areas I actually struggled with the most for some reason. I don't know why. I think it was just because I had a bad taste in my mouth from some previous experiences. But it was a big learning curve for me to kind of get on the right page. And something I saw in my career a lot was people had all these great recovery plans, but they never actually tested them, right? So a big part of recovery is actually testing it and verifying that you can meet those RTOs, RPOs, and MTD. Because the last thing you want to happen is you have a disaster, you go to recover and it doesn't work right, you haven't practiced, you know, everybody's a little stressed out and you kind of blow your objectives. So yeah, I definitely would agree with Renee's comment that sometimes young architects kind of overlook it, because when you think about it the first time, it's not as sexy maybe as some of the other ones we're going to talk about. I know I have a personal favorite and this was not it. But nonetheless, really, really important and can be super, super critical to your business. If you don't have, you know, if you haven't designed for recoverability, that could put a company out of business, literally. Very, very important. All right, so let's see. We're going to go to A, availability. Now, this is my personal favorite for some crazy reason. I don't know. So, Kat, why don't you start with a little chat on availability for us?
Okay, so to me, availability is something that we can measure by the percentage of uptime that we provide to the customer. So this can be either the infrastructure or the operating system or the actual applications. Very often within this group, we talk about single point of. So what we are putting into the infrastructure to avoid these. We're talking about all the options. We are talking about SLAs with the customers. So what kind of service level agreement they have. One thing I would mention with SLAs, and I've seen this sometimes confused, is that the downtime that's specified by the SLA 9s is the unplanned downtime. So for every customer, we do plan downtime windows. Those are necessary when we do updates, patching, and so on. These do not count into the downtime that's in the SLA. Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, availability, like Kat said, is the delivery of a service. So it's obviously measured by an SLA. That SLA converts to an RPO and RTO, work recovery time, and MTD, maximum tolerable downtime. Obviously, it also goes hand in hand with recoverability. To me, availability is more within the data center, so high availability of the service that you're delivering. The way that you can do that is through highly available load balancers with highly available web front ends. Application layer can also be highly available, and the database will also be highly available. One very popular way of providing availability with vSphere is obviously to use HA or vSphere fault tolerance, right? So that's if you don't have the maturity to protect your business critical apps, right? So it's a single point of failure, then you can use vSphere HA and those mechanisms to actually provide that protection. What else is there to say? That's basically it. Oh, actually, on recoverability earlier and availability, obviously data protection is a big part of that as well. So how are you backing up that app? And if you do have corruption of data, how are you going to meet that RPO is another area that a lot of people get caught, particularly for business critical apps. If you've got an RPO of 0, if that database gets corrupted and that corruption gets replicated, how are you going to recover from that? Typically in practice, the way I solve that problem is we have a backup that's running every 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And then at a third site, we will have a database log engine that's running, that's collecting all of those logs. So the way you would recover is you restore the last backup that you have, database consistent backup, and then you would replay the logs to get back to that point in time to get your RPO 0.
Great. Just have a question from one of the viewers, Joseph, and just going back to recoverability, I'll throw it out to either of you. Recoverability, do you like solutions that leverage the same technology for DR, backup, replication, so it is consistent and testable?
I'll go first. So finding solutions that actually tick all of those boxes can be quite difficult. If you have one platform that can actually handle that for you, like a Zerto or a Veeam, then yeah, definitely it's worth going for. Because what will happen is as an architect, you will build solutions using a particular tool set. And once you become an expert in those tools, you'll find yourself reusing them more and more. Obviously, assessing new technologies takes a lot of time, particularly if it's just come out of stealth or it's quite new to the market. So, yeah, definitely. I think yes.
For me, if it's possible, then yes, I would go for it. We will talk later on about the ease of management, and this comes with it. And so if we would be able to use one tool that's able to do everything we want, it would be preferable. However, when I go to choose a solution, what I normally do is I create a table listing what my actual functional requirements are, what I'm trying to achieve with certain application, and making sure that all the capabilities are within the product. So that's how I compare and choose the solution.
Great, which means we go right into M because we're doing ramps of manageability. So Kat, do you want to start with that because you just touched on it a little bit?
Okay, so this is a very important one. Consists of several topics. So as I mentioned, ease of management. You always have to keep in mind that somebody will need to be managing the infrastructure. So we are always trying to make it as easy as possible. What comes with that hand in hand, I would say, is also automation or orchestration. So finding solutions that can maybe be taken out of the hands of the day-to-day admins, and tasks that can be that are repeatable could be automated. And also it would also talk about how scalable and flexible the infrastructure is. So when we are trying to put in new solutions and grow the infrastructure, how we go around to do that.
Yep. So for me, manageability comes into two sections. Number one is day one, staying it up, how easy it is to configure and go live. And then after that, it's day two operations, which is the part that really matters. So things like lifecycle management and one-click software upgrades and the ability for a team to manage that solution as seamlessly as possible. The big important things. So obviously there, the emergence of hyperconvergence is a big play in the manageability space. Yeah, Nutanix have the concept of the one-click upgrade. VMware has the SDDC manager, which is obviously a part of VxRack. VxRail has got Evo Manager, which is their lifecycle management solution as well. So definitely the ability to take a solution once you go live with it and then operate it and maintain it with a minimum of friction. That's the key thing here. And if it takes you a little bit longer to configure it, to go live, it's worth investing that time and effort, because once you go day two, it's very difficult to work on production systems that are very difficult to manage. So you want to reduce that friction as much as possible.
Since you said the word hyper-converged, I have seen some people have the understanding that since it's hyper-conversion easy, they don't necessarily need to follow a design methodology or do a proper design. How do you both feel about that statement?
Kat, you want to go first?
To me, you should always do the design and follow the process, because what you are using to deliver it comes later on within the design process, or at least that's the way I view it. So I would always go through the methodology and start with what we have been talking about, and I would get to the hyperconverged later on and see how that fits what we've been discussing until that point.
Yeah. So you've got a customer that's selected hyperconvergence, hopefully for the right reasons. Definitely, you still need to follow the design methodology because hyperconverged systems integrate into legacy systems as well. It could be IT service management, legacy data protection solution, legacy information security solution. So definitely you need to go through that process. And that's one of the reasons why Nutanix created the Nutanix Platform Expert Program. Nutanix technology is very easy to consume. However, you do have to integrate with the rest of the ecosystem. So design is very important.
Yeah, great point, Renee. I was going to bring up NPX as well, and you're also an NPX holder, correct?
Yep, I was the first one when they went GA.
First one. And remember, in the early days of Nutanix, they were hiring many people with the VCDX certification as well. So it kind of talks about Nutanix's commitment to providing this excellent hyperconverged system, one-click upgrades, easy to use, but their commitment to integrating with the rest of the traditional infrastructure they might need to. So to any of you out there that think, well, I'm just going to buy an HCI and plug it in and go, yes, it is that simple, but you must do your due diligence first. Make sure you're picking HCI for the right reasons. Check all your integration points and kind of do what you would do in any traditional infrastructure. Did I give a good little ad, Angelo?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You're welcome. Did we have any other questions in the meantime before I go on?
I don't see anything. Eric, do you have anything?
Quiet so far.
Okay, so we're doing ramps, right? R-A-M-P, performance. All right. I see. I go the other way, so I actually have to think about it now. So let's talk about performance. I think you're going to start this time, Renee.
Yep. Performance is probably the area that every architect out there is very familiar with. That's what we typically tend to focus on, speeds and feeds and how quickly is it going to perform. And am I driving a Ferrari or a Toyota? So definitely performance is the strongest suite when you're talking about architects that are out there. So there with performance, compute, network, storage, security, IOPS, IO sizes. One thing I will say about performance is that it's very easy to fall into the trap of drag racing. So using a synthetic IO load tester and using that to compare your different workloads and deciding if this platform or that platform is the right one to go with. Obviously, in the real world, you will want to test real workloads. So a case in point, when I was working for a bank in Saudi Arabia and we were selecting our next platform of choice, we spent the time to set up a test platform with our most complicated or our most demanding workload, which was our end of year close of business, right? So this is where we're doing all the transaction processing. That is an OLTP type workload. So we tested it with that. And then we also, that's OLAP, analytics processing. And then we also tested with our OLTP workload, which was our tellers accessing the system during the business day, right? So those were the two criteria that we used to benchmark the performance of the solution that we were going with. And from there, then we made our decisions, right? So the synthetic race car testing really didn't provide any value for us.
I will just add to that as well. If it is possible, you should always do benchmarking. In my experience, that's how you get the best results. I've always also been in situations where we took the time, we took the application, we built the infrastructure, small one, and tested, changed the settings, we've seen how it compared, and did the final configuration based on that. The other thing I would just quickly mention is when specifying or planning performance for your workloads, it is important to have a sample that's valid enough. So you need to know what kind of workload you are working with. If you're using an application that's, for example, is heavily used at the end of the month, but it may be quieter during the rest of the weeks, I would always suggest to do a big enough sample, just so that you will have relevant statistical and workload data. You can either use historical data and performance statistics, or just use tools such as VROPS that will give you an idea of what your workload patterns are, and that will help you set the performance as needed.
Yeah, Kat makes an excellent point. Sometimes people don't necessarily have an understanding of their performance requirements, right? They might say, I need 100,000 IOPS, which really isn't that much anymore, right? With all this flash and blah, blah, blah. But they're not basing that number on anything. They're just pulling it out of their mind, right? So they might need more, they might need less. That's why it's really important to look at things like application characteristics, use a tool like Turbonomic or VROPS to look at historical performance, or even V1. Hey. So those are things that are, again, often overlooked even by customers, right? They're used to, I want the biggest, the best, the fastest, but they might not have the budget for it, and they might not understand what they actually need. So talking about performance, I know there's three big things, right? We always talk about over provisioning of resources in a virtualized environment, right? So we can then provision storage at the hypervisor level and on most storage arrays. We can overcommit CPU and memory. So have you guys encountered any kind of gotchas in that area, or heard any guidelines for any specific applications or servers, or any kind of best practices in general for doing that kind of activity?
Yeah, so with host design in particular, you need to decide whether you're going to scale out or scale up. I won't spend a heap of time explaining that. You can just Google it. With overcommitment of resources, so obviously vSphere has got the ability to overcommit memory and CPU. You can also provide quality of service with virtual machine shares for VMDKs, CPU, RAM, and you've also got network IO control. So you do have the ability to oversubscribe, right, to get more for your dollar. But if you're going with mission critical or business critical apps where they're latency sensitive, then typically you're going to be using reservations to reserve resources to provide the best application performance. Same goes for latency sensitive real-time apps like Cisco, like IP telephony systems and real-time video systems. There you're going to be selecting the latency sensitive option within the virtual machine to optimize the resource delivery to that virtual machine.
With my previous customer, I was working a lot with monster machines, monster VMs. And in this case, it was really interesting. We were using either VMs per host or just one mapping. And we could see differences in performance for the applications. For example, whether we had hyper-threading enabled or not. So again, it goes back to the benchmarking. If possible, if you could test how the application reacts with different settings, that will give you a better idea of what to use. The same goes with we were using memory reservation a lot because the application was performing better if the memory was reserved.
Yeah, good point. And also with monster VMs, particularly with mission critical databases. So using paravirtual adapters is also very important. Running the latest virtual machine hardware, latest virtual machine tools, and also optimizing your database drives across the 4 paravirtual controllers is also very important.
I got a question here from one of our viewers, but before I ask that question, how has your mindset changed in terms of, we're hearing a lot more about cloud native apps, and a lot of us in IT are used to traditional apps, VMs, but now we're moving into sort of like this container world, Kubernetes. At least that's a lot of the chat, like sort of discussion on Twitter, if you will. But does any of your planning or mindset change around those items versus sort of the traditional way of doing IT?
So I think those fundamentals still apply. It just comes down to the container platform API, how that's automated. But those problems that or those attributes that you worry about for virtual machines are still the same for containers. It's just that they're being abstracted. When I talk to my customers, the customers that are developing a lot of their own code in-house, they're the ones that are moving to container architectures and cloud native and immutable 12-factor applications. Very large enterprise, global enterprise, they are still using mostly off-the-shelf software. And until those vendors that deliver off-the-shelf software offer a container solution, they'll be sticking with virtual machines and non-x86 platforms, at least in my experience.
I would just add to that, again, it depends on what kind of infrastructure you are providing. If you are building an infrastructure for standard, let's call them 3-tier apps and legacy apps, the approach will be different to providing an infrastructure for DevOps teams that need to be able to build up and tear down hundreds of VMs, in a day when they're doing any sort of testing.
Sure. Good. So question here
I'm
from a
going to
viewer.
interrupt you first because I have to go on it. I see a lot of people getting involved with cloud, and they don't care about anything. They just, cloud is magic, right? You still have CPU, you still have memory, and you still have storage in a server, right? And you should still have a fundamental understanding of how all those things work together, and especially how they work in the context of your cloud provider, right? So depending on what type of storage you're using in Amazon, you're going to have better performance on one over the other. So I see a lot of people kind of saying that infrastructure as we're used to it on premises no longer matters in the cloud. And I kind of have to disagree with that. The fundamentals are still important, still apply, and you still need to understand how all these different things interact with each other. That's my little rant. Thank you, Angelo.
Yep,
great.
Can't help it. That fires me up all the time.
Yeah, it's true. It's just that you don't have any control over it. You're just consuming it as a service.
Exactly.
It still matters, still important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good stuff. So question from a viewer, this goes back to management, do you favor appliance builds over component builds for management?
So for me, yes. If I can get a black box appliance where all of the complexity is within that virtual appliance, I'll consume that every time. Yep. Assuming it has the same functions and features as building it by hand.
Yeah, I'm completely the same. And maybe I think a lot of people went through the same process as I did. Because I started off years ago as a Windows admin, for example, at vCenter, we were kind of scared of the appliance because it was Linux based and we did not know how we could be able to manage it. And it was just easier for us to build a Windows server that we knew how to operate and build vCenter on top of that so we could see the services and so on. But over the years, this has rapidly changed, and now I take an appliance anytime I can.
And I also think it's easier when talking with your IT department, if a lot of the, for instance, the security folks would use like physical appliances, it's also an easier conversation, I think, at least in my experience, to say, hey, we're virtualizing. I understand you have a virtual appliance that we can replace that physical appliance with. And they seem to buy in quickly because at least they understand, okay, it's an appliance, now it's virtual. You seem to get a lot of buy-in that way. And then you can leverage those folks to sort of evangelize within the IT department about virtualizing other appliances as well. So yeah, good points.
Yeah, well, definitely from a security perspective, your security policymakers, security decision makers, if they understand that what was a physical appliance, you're getting the exact same thing, but it's virtual, they're definitely very quick to adopt. Back in the day, like 8 years ago, you would have application owners who would say, oh, no, I can't have a virtual machine. My workloads are just the heaviest workloads you've ever seen. You're not going to be able to handle them virtually, right? And then you investigate what they're actually running, and they're at like 2% CPU utilization or whatnot. And you say, okay, well, let's try it as a virtual appliance at least, or virtualize it, do the conversion, and let's see. We'll have the physical appliance as a rollback. And always, time and time again, it's fine. It's no problem.
Yeah, my best response I got from a business unit was when we virtualized the HR system, it actually improved the performance of it, and they were quick to say, hey, what did you folks do? Like what did you change, because we're getting better performance. So just, yeah, you're right, interesting.
The best was, this was about 10 years ago, people would think because I had a physical server that had X number of CPUs, they needed that in a VM, right? So they would be like, I need 8 CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM. Remember, this is 10 years ago, so that's a lot, right? And I was the junior member on the virtualization team, and our kind of rule was you got 1 CPU until you proved you needed more. That's kind of how things worked, because back then that was mostly true. And I was a junior person, and I sat down the hallway from the gentleman who was in charge of the virtualization environment. So like people would go to him, they would say no, then they'd walk down to my desk and think that I'd give him a VM with like all these CPUs and all this memory. And I'm like, yeah, can you have him send me an email and tell me to do that? And then I'll be happy to. And that just never, ever happened. But yeah, everybody thought, oh, we're virtualizing this app, we need all this stuff. And like when I said the 2% CPU and whatever, and they didn't actually need it. So it was kind of funny back in the day.
Yeah, I also remember web servers that had like 8 CPUs. Like, you don't really need that. But maybe a thing, see it, database servers still being left as physical. Do you have this experience? Because I've seen
that was the thing. No one wanted to virtualize the databases.
But I can still see it today, though, in a lot of environments.
Yeah, there's a couple of primary reasons I think that with the database stuff, one is just native distrust. One might say the DBAs, aside from security folks, are the most likely to hang on to history and classical ways. But most importantly, I think the licensing is still a little bit odd on the database side. We sort of joke about how Oracle has probably more lawyers than developers. Like we've bumped into it. Microsoft SQL had the same thing, which is why as virtualization became, the primary choice in now cloud stuff, thankfully it's moving. But it's very true, Kat. Like I'm seeing it in environments that I go in all the time, and there's physical servers all over the place, and nothing wrong with it as long as it meets the requirements and does all the right things. Renee, you're about to jump in as well, yeah?
So for me, I don't. The only time I tend to see physical databases is for non-x86. So AIX, HPUX, and whatnot. In x86 world, very rarely do I see physical databases.
Have you ever met something you couldn't virtualize, Renee?
Some of the monster. So when you're refactoring, application refactoring and OS refactoring from non-x86 to x86, some of those monster databases that they run for like medical apps and whatnot, that's a struggle. But anything that's x86, virtualize it, no problem. I've never really come across anything that couldn't be.
My story from the trench of the day was a Progress database running on a piece of RISC equipment. It had been around for decades kind of thing. And we used it for reconciliation of previous orders from that were beyond the regular SEC boundary for the financial services company I worked. And so everyone's twice a year, they would get a call from somebody saying, can you check what my strike price was on this when I bought it as part of my portfolio? And it wasn't in the online system. And so they would go and they'd say, hey, this particular system has gone sideways. So, 2 or 3 times a year, we'd go back in and just be like, clear. And we'd reboot the system. You'd cross your fingers. You watch dust kick out of the fans, and it would miraculously start up. And then eventually one day it didn't. And we hired a developer to come in and refactor it, poured it over into at least an open source Linux derivative, and we're able to recover the progress. But it's one of those things where it's still out there. And definitely the biggest challenge was getting it moved over. I want to bring up a good question as well. When we talk about this, we definitely think in systems thinking, but I think the most important thing about systems thinking is we only know the system by its interaction with people. So when you're doing things around availability, especially availability, and assigning priority to availability, how do you really gather that information? Like because some person who's using the system may say, hey, you know, my system that orders my water is the most important system in the world because I need 8 waters a day. But to the business, it may actually not be. So how do you approach that? Renee, we'll start with you.
Yeah, very short answer to that. Business impact analysis. So enterprises that know what they're doing, they all have a BIA, and the BIA drives everything. That's where you get your priorities from. And typically in a business impact analysis, you have the concept of the gold workload, the silver workload, and the bronze workload. And that is what you use to drive everything within your design.
Kat, I imagine you've sort of seen a few of those where you may or may not have had one of those BIAs waiting for you. What's your experience been in the customers and folks that you've talked to?
Yeah, well, sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't, and then you have to go and figure it out. So based on the different types of workloads, and also I would mention dependencies. So sometimes you need to figure out what is dependent on what, and that will define the order of bringing everything up.
And as well, when we talk about recoverability, it's funny, again, you know, history and business continuity, I've dealt with a lot of that. And what we would do is we would invite human resources to those meetings as well, because it's not just about systems recovery, but there's people recovery. Now, do you put people recovery as part of the recoverability process in your designs typically?
Yes. Yep, you do. So that's the work recovery time. So when you're doing so you've got an SLA, you convert the SLA into RPO, recovery point objective, which is how old can the data be. Then you've got the recovery time objective, which is the bringing up the technical side of the solution so that it's ready. And then you've got the work recovery time, which is getting the people ready so you can actually start consuming that service again. And the RTO and the WRT is what becomes the MTD, the maximum tolerable downtime. Yeah, so I have that in all my designs.
And one last one as well on this stream, when you talk we typically interface with operations teams when we do a lot of our design work. And what's your experience, both Renee and Kat, in getting out and amplifying that feedback loop to, say, developers and such? Or do you rely on the operations teams to talk to developers to make sure they understand the true application requirements when they're doing some of these designs with you?
They're a stakeholder, so I'm talking to them as well.
I'll just add that we have been in situations where we talk about DevOps, right? So it should be one team and everybody's one happy family and working together. But in my experience, usually you have the operations team, you have the developers. They may have different goals and ideas about how to do things. So you need to somehow bring it together and bring that harmony in.
Yeah, if you could find somebody that could actually define DevOps and not anger somebody, that'd be the greatest discovery ever. We all struggle with what it actually means. Sorry, Renee, go ahead.
Yeah. So definitely when you're doing these type of big engagements with a customer, the first thing to do is to get everyone in a room together. And then that's where you make sure no one's being excluded, in particular the data protection people and the information security people and also developers. They typically get left out by mistake. So as long as you have them all included from the very start, that's the way that you breed success, right? Because the way human beings work, if they're excluded, even accidentally, then it becomes a them and us mentality, even if that's not intended.
Well, we've got one more letter in the acronym, Melissa. Where do we go from here?
And this is a very, very close second to my second favorite design quality, security. Ooh.
Right now, Edward is out there. So for folks who don't already know, Edward Haletki, a great supporter of VDM and the broader community in general, not just in VMware and virtualization, but Edward's been a great contributor. So he's at TexIWill, and I know he's going to cringe no matter what we answer. He's going to say, like, you guys never really fully cover security, so let's hit it now.
Renee, why don't you go first?
Yep. Okay. Yeah, so security is also very often overlooked. So security is governance, operational security, so security operations as well. And then you've got the security of the infrastructure itself, right? So that's everything from role-based access control, network filtering, application filtering, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, host-based security policies, and also endpoint protection. So where you've got an endpoint security agent running in each of the guest machines or in your container architecture, whatever it may be. There it really comes down to whatever security solution or security posture that you're going to select is obviously driven by policy, right? So that's where security governance comes in. Those policies, you want to make sure that the policies that you're complying with don't actually impact the rest of the design criteria that you're trying to deliver, right? Because an over-secured solution becomes very difficult to operate, maintain, and also to consume as an end user. And that typically is the knife edge that every architect is trying to balance on, right? How do I meet the security requirements of this solution yet make it usable and friendly to our customers?
Yeah, I come from a background of PCI DSS certified infrastructures and solutions, and this last point Rana mentioned is really important. I've seen that a lot of times we're trying to put all the security measures in, but the operations team then has a really hard time trying to manage it because it makes it even more complicated for them. So trying to find a balance while still satisfying all the requirements of, for example, certifications, but also keeping it manageable, as easily manageable as possible. One more point I would add to security, which is important, is also monitoring and auditing. A lot of these certifications come with regular audits that not only need to be proven by documentation, but also in many cases access logs. So for all the user roles and access roles, you also have to then go on and prove how users are accessing certain data or locations, and good auditing solution will help you with that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we've talked about the importance of getting everybody in the room, right? All the key stakeholders, make devs and ops be happy together. We want everybody in the room during that initial kickoff meeting usually. Do you find yourselves usually educating the customers on some of these design qualities that they might not be thinking of when they're thinking of their requirements? And do you ever have them do something like rank them to kind of say, well, you know, in our environment, we are the zombie society and we're protecting the world against zombies. So security is the most important because those zombies are really good hackers. How does that kind of work for you guys when you've done this?
Yeah, definitely. So you're there as a coach to hold hands and move them along. So obviously there's a big educational component to every subject that you're discussing. And then from there, it's about extraction of requirements, right? And just the conversations that are going on, you let them play out, right? Because everyone needs to have a voice. And your job as the consulting architect is to sort the chaff from the wheat. Right, it's kind of like you're digging for gold. Right, you need to recognize a nugget when you see it, and then latch onto it.
I would also say, to me, design quality ranking is really important because it will help you as an architect to understand the design better. At least that's how I feel. So if you can come up with any kind of ranking, what is the most important thing to the customer for the project, and what is the least important one, it will help you and guide you through the design process.
Yep, definitely.
Now I want to roll back to the start. If you're Melissa, do you have anything to close up on security? All right, sorry, I'm just firing right in here. One of the things that I think about is trade-offs, and we've talked about it through, you know, understanding security and everything else. When it comes to manageability and availability and stuff like that, we talk about ease versus cost, and availability hits it, right? We're chasing nines. We talk about 3 nines, 4 nines, whatever it's going to be. How do you find the going from 3 nines to 5 nines, you know, the costs and the complexity in doing such, and how do you coach somebody, you know, in your experience through what that trade-off means?
Yeah, well, it's orders of magnitude. So definitely the more nines that you have, the ease of manageability is going to go down. All right. So much more complex solution, and also the cost of the solution is going to go through the roof by orders of magnitude. And what it really comes down to is like Kat said earlier, and that is the ranking of requirements and what is important. What is the budget that you have? And typically it's budget. The cost constraint is the typical decision maker at the end, because once you've got that bill of materials with a purchase order in front of the CFO, but typically the CFO is obviously more driven by fiscal responsibility than the CIO is, or the CTO, and that's typically where that needs to be resolved. And the money man tends to win.
That's a true statement. Kat, what's your experience been in that, and how do you coach your clients and other folks through that?
As Rene said, this is about conversation, because I think most of the customers would gladly go for 5 nines, but that's in most cases just either not realistic or they don't have the budget. So the expectations need to be managed, and basically it's up to us as architects to educate the customer and explain what does that actually mean, what they are requesting, and then based on the conversation basically come down to any kind of realistic setup that meets their requirements and also budget constraints.
Yeah, quite often my experience had been we'd set tier 1, tier 2, and we would say tier 1 means, you know, it's going to get secondary copies, hot spares, etc. Like, it was very different design and architecture and operations. And then we had a chargeback system. So luckily we had the ability to impact the application owner directly, to say you had a virtual chargeback of what you were going to pay per month. And they would say, well, this is tier 1 application. I'd say, okay, great. It's you know, $1,800 a month in operations cost for chargeback. And they'd say, perfect, we have a tier 2 application. Like, there was a very quick to assign the trade-off of the cost and the money. They would always choose, like you said, 5 nines, tier 1, whatever it's going to be. No one would say, no, I'm good, let's just put it on tape, leave it in the corner on the shelf. That they will opt for it, but it's the understanding the trade-off.
Yeah, the other subtlety with what you were talking about, Eric, is the application owner who comes in with a brand new platform that is completely architecturally not compliant with your organization. Like, for example, you're an x86 shop and they bring in an AIX solution, right, multi-site. And then when they see the cost of operations, right, training up people, and hopefully you've got an architectural center of excellence that will actually say, no, this is not going to be allowed, and a CFO that backs that up. But definitely that's another challenge there. The application cowboys who come in with a whole new stack.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned that, Renee. Or very early in my career, I ended up, we had like an architectural board at my company. I ended up basically as like the website person, like doing all the updates with all the standards. Like, that's what I did. But I learned a lot from like sitting in the meetings and taking the minutes and doing the website updates. And that's what the organization was trying to do. Put in these really stringent kind of guidelines for what you could buy, what you could purchase, unless you had some business reason that you needed something else, at which case you had to go get approval, make a business case, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's really important in an environment. And, you know, I think almost human tendency is we all want the biggest, the best, the shiniest, the fastest, right? And it keeps coming back to the RTOs and the RPOs. So you might have a customer say, I need to have synchronous storage. Like, that is the best thing ever. I want synchronous storage. And you're like, okay, you realize that's at least double what you would have needed before. And you have an RPO of 12 hours. So why do you need synchronous storage? And a lot of times you got to keep reminding them of, this is what you told me you needed. Do we need to go back and do that BIA again? Is there something you missed? Is there another business driver driving this requirement? Or do you just want it because it's new and shiny and it's fun?
Yeah, tech for tech's sake is a big problem when you've got tech guys making the decisions. Typically that gets, in my experience, that gets knocked off when the bill is, or the bill of materials and the solution is presented to the CIO, and the CIO says, okay, what business value are you delivering? What business problem are you solving? And tech guys typically don't understand that world. And that's when they typically get caught.
That's why it's very handy when, and I'm coming from both sides here, so been there, and also now from the other side, when the tech guys need to write justifications. So why they chose a certain solution and then justify it, why is it that usually solves the problem.
Because it has a really cool bezel on the front.
Yeah.
And they have a great, whatever.
Well, your tech guys hate the term "write me a business case."
They do.
Do with that.
And that's something kind of when you're making that jump from, being the tech person to the architect, you have to force yourself to start thinking in the mindsets. Everything goes back to the business case, everything back to the BIA, everything back to the requirements. And that's a big jump for a lot of people. It's a completely different way of thinking.
It is. It's a complete and different change. Business architecture, business value, business problems, all that stuff, TCO, ROI. Tech guys don't normally get that.
Now we're rounding up to the hour, and I'm going to be that person that squeezes in one more question, because I know this one comes in all the time. Where do best practices fit in when you're doing this, right? Because today's best practices are tomorrow's what the hell were we thinking? If someone says, do you ever put in the word best practice when you're doing a design doc? I'll open it up to Kat to begin.
I was always told never, ever, ever to do that. So I would say you can start off taking that as an example, but then base it on what you are trying to achieve, what your design decision is, whether you can justify the setting, and so on. So you can take it as the starting point, but obviously you need to then adapt it to whatever you are doing.
Renee, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so best practices, that word comes out of my mouth when I'm having initial conversations with customers and I have no idea what their requirements are, what they're trying to achieve. So I'll talk about best practices and then I'll have the pros and cons of each one of those. But definitely if you're going for VCDX or another elite level cert, the term best practice should never be written in writing. You are the expert. You're the one who needs to make those decisions. And you should be able to argue why you made those decisions versus what a best practice is, right? Best practice is for dummies, really. It's for people who don't understand the pros and the cons and they just want to get it up and going as quickly as possible.
Exactly. And you might actually end up following the best practice because that meets your business requirements. But again, you have to understand why those best practices are best practices. You just don't blanketly, well, this is the best practice, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, you've explained it all the way, the pros and the cons, and you understand the risks and whatnot.
Yeah, just because it aligns with the best practice doesn't mean that that's the only reason you do it. So
I would love to touch on blue-green deployments, but that might be for another episode.
Sounds like we got Masterclass 3 already lined up. Well, we're up to the hour. This has been great. We've had a ton of folks who are on live here watching the stream. This is phenomenal. Thank you to everybody again for joining us. We love the idea of what we're doing with the series. As you've probably seen, so Virtual Design Master has shifted this year. We decided to not run the typical full program. However, this is a good chance for us to test the waters, see what folks are doing and what they want to see from us. And we are getting lots of great feedback about Masterclass. So we're going to open up. We're going to do more of these sessions as we get through the fall. We are heading into show season right now. It is VMworld just around the corner from the live session today. Quite literally, we're just over a week away from the beginning of VMworld in Las Vegas. So for folks who are going to be there, definitely Angelo, Kat, Renee, myself, we're all going to be there on site. So chase us down. You'll find me in and out of the Turbonomic booth. Angelo, I'm betting you're going to be floating about between Community Lounge. You'll be in the mechanics area. Renee, I'm sure you'll have a crowd of folks that'll be following you about, looking to steal some more information from you. And Kat, if they haven't tracked you down today, let's make sure that people come in and say, I found you on Virtual Design Master. So before we finish up,
she has stickers as well. She's bringing a bunch of, was it V Gamers?
Yes, it's VGamers. It's our channel we have for all the people in the V community that like gaming, whether that's PC, Xbox, PS4. So join the channel, find the VGamers hashtag, and yes, I'll be bringing stickers, very cool ones. So find me, I'll give you one.
Great.
So let's close down. We'll make sure to remind folks how to find everybody. So Kat, if you want to tell us where do we find you online, and where can we see you at upcoming shows?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at _Katgav_, or use my full name, Katarina Wagnerova, and I will be in Vegas for VMworld.
And Renee, where will we find you?
I'll be at VMworld in 2 weeks, so if you see me walking around, you want to have a chat, feel free to come up to me. I'm quite tall, quite big, but I'm not going to bite you.
Luckily, you're easy to find in the crowd. Just look, if you see a giant shoulders and head above the rest of the crowd, you found Renee, so it's easy to track down. Yeah. Melissa, I know we won't be able to share your knowledge at VMworld. Of course, you're going to be covering the event from afar, I'm sure, but where do we find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at vmiss33 and my blog at vmiss.net.
And Angelo, where can we find you?
I will also be at VMworld. You can find me on Twitter at Angelo Luciani, and I blog at virtuwise.com.
Excellent. And I, for those who don't already know me and who aren't sick of hearing me talk all the time, my name is Eric Wright. I'm at Disco Posse. I'll be at VMworld Live in Las Vegas. So looking forward to seeing some folks there. We're going to have some more announcements coming up. So keep your eyes on virtualdesignmaster.io and watch for the Virtual Design Master hashtag. We'll have some upcoming news and announcements as we get out of VMworld, and we're going to put together some more masterclass sessions, and then we'll talk about what's next for Virtual Design Master and many other things that our community is doing. And with that, thank you everybody for joining us today, and we will see you all at the events very, very soon.